All right, Jake, let's be honest here. BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, Houston all struggled. Before I give a leading question, I'm going to keep it simple. Why?
Honestly, I think depth, and that's the biggest thing. Is they all talked about the fact that they needed to find quality depth, and from the BYU perspective, you saw BYU, their frontline guys, their top tier guys were just as good as anybody in the Big 12. The problem was they had some of those guys get injured and miss games. They're talking like the Aiden Robbins, the Ben Bywaters out there, Keaton Slovis even to a degree after he missed the final 4 games of the season. BYU did not have the adequate depth to step up into those roles and keep BYU rolling. That's a big reason why the Cougars finished with a 5-game losing streak and a 5-7 record overall. So I think, speaking for BYU and the other newcomers, they have got to make a concerted effort on the recruiting front to bring in as much talent as possible, whether that's via the high school ranks, junior college, or the transfer portal. You've got to go about building quality depth. Now, this is not going to be a one-year fix for all these programs. I know that BYU's got a multi-year approach to this, and they hope that they can kind of, I guess, jumpstart it in a way with the transfer portal and the like, but it is going to take a little bit of time for them to get to full health and having fully stocked rosters like some of the Hateful Eight, as we've talked about. But the bigger thing, I think, for BYU's perspective is as they continue to do this, if they can keep their guys healthy, they have proven they can compete on a game in and game out basis. The problem is, once again, if you have a couple of injuries that hit some of these critical positions, that is where things really get exposed.
I don't want to poop on that. I don't. But at the same time, the pushback would be, hey, you knew coming into this conference you were going to need more depth as you went into the Power 5. Where was the disconnect in the offseason, and does it solely revolve around the transfer portal?
Well, I'll just say this. BYU crowed, and I'll say this. The coaches said that we have more depth at every position. The offense in particular, Aaron Roderick made a similar comment to that, saying that we've upgraded at all these positions. And I do think that they maybe were a little foolhardy in saying that because the proof was in the pudding. The offense was not as good as BYU hoped it could be. Now, it didn't come alive in the final 2 games against the Oklahoma schools, and maybe they could have picked one of those off, but it necessitated changes. They fired their offensive line and tight end coaches. They look like they're going to hire TJ Woods from Georgia Southern to be the offensive line coach, and with TBD on the other assistant they're going to hire. But the bigger thing is, yes, I think they thought that they had gone out and had a 2-year ramp up to try and build some of that depth. There are some positions at BYU, I believe, have depth at those positions. The problem is those are the positions that seem to stay healthy all season long, whereas positions where they didn't have that depth, or maybe kind of got caught up thinking that they had it, but they really didn't, those are the positions that really betrayed them. I'm thinking of linebacker. I'm thinking of running back. I'm also even thinking at some of the wide receiver positions that they thought, I think, that they had more depth than they actually had. And the problem was they got caught with their pants down.
Is it too harsh to say that these 4 teams were not ready for Power 5 football in 2023?
I would say it's a little harsh because I think all of them were putting the effort out there. I just think the talent level was not necessarily adequate. Now, you could obviously look at the coaching situation. Dana Holgorsen ultimately lost his job at Houston. He was already kind of hanging by a thread before Houston even got in to the Big 12. There were so many rumors about him the last couple of years about how Tillman Fertitta, if he was happy with Dana Holgorsen's performance. You know what? If you guys were going to make that move, you should have made it before you jumped into the Big 12. You kind of wasted a year here for Houston in particular. UCF, there were a lot of people out there that thought UCF was going to be the best of the newcomers, and ultimately they proved, I think, to be that with Gus Malzahn as their coach. They had a lot of talent, it felt like, and speed. But then Cincinnati and BYU, they did make a coaching change at Cincinnati. That was very depleted in terms of the overall roster for Scott Satterfield. I'm not sold on Satterfield as a coach per se. But then in the case of BYU, you had an established coaching staff that, like I said, they made comments similar to, like, we feel like we've got the roster to go out there and compete. And they did compete. But the problem was, anybody who watched the West Virginia game, the Iowa State game for BYU, some of these middle games where they just seemingly didn't show up, that is an indictment on that coaching staff and the BYU football program, because the problem is it felt like there was a little bit of a holdover from their era in the independent era where they'd play a big opponent, maybe have a week or two off against a lesser opponent where they could kind of coast and then get geared back up for one of those top level opponents when it came back up in 2 or 3 weeks. The problem I think that they realized this season is there's no weeks off at this level. It is a week by week thing. You got to stay engaged every single week. And if you don't show up, quote unquote, if you don't put in that effort, you're going to get blown away. And that's what happened against West Virginia. That's what happens against Iowa State, even Texas to a degree for BYU, even though the Cougars, I felt like, hung pretty tough in that game. But you've got to be able to show up every single week and put the same effort out there. And I think that was a hard lesson that BYU learned.
Jake, I know the greatest command is love, but let's put it to the side for a second. I know it's terrible to say, but let's put it to the side for a second. Did you kind of revel in the fact that the other three new teams also struggled? Was that a good thing for BYU fans to see?
I think it was, because I think they felt like, okay, we're not the exception. Like we're all in this together. Now, obviously, BYU fans, they've got a very proud tradition as a football program, and they want nothing more than to see their program go out there and compete and be a top tier football program. But yes, I do think them looking over at a Houston or looking at a Cincinnati or a UCF and seeing them, hey, they're not sailing smoothly along, and they're having their issues as well. I think there was a little bit of a commiseration there with BYU fans saying, okay, yeah, they're struggling too. This is not an easy transition. It's going to take some time. The other thing I think BYU fans understand, I know they're as reticent as anybody to give any type of credit to Utah, but they saw Utah make the build. Utah had a crazy first year in the Pac-12, but then backslid hard to 2 5-7 seasons, and then really started to build from there. I think BYU fans watch kind of the slow climb that Utah had to build themselves up in the Pac-12, and I think in some ways they can look at that and say that may be kind of the formula or the template that we have to follow if we really want to get to the top of the heap.
Will it be a slow climb, or will it be something that BYU is able to do next year or even the year after? That's what we'll hit on next. But first, let's hear from our valued sponsors over at FanDuel right here on Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One of my favorite places to spend my time is FanDuel. That's where you can catch me because they have an app that makes it convenient and easy. I sit on my couch and I say BYU's playing basketball. I can put some monies on BYU playing basketball at FanDuel.com/locked on, or Baylor, or Arizona, or Kansas. The Beast 12 parlay, where you only pick Big 12 teams to win in a single night. Probably going to do pretty well for you. And right now you can do that at FanDuel.com. As the weather gets colder, their NFL deals stay hot. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's right, $5 on Baylor or BYU or Texas Tech or even Texas if you want to. That's $150 if your team wins. You've been looking at different apps, thinking about joining FanDuel. No better time than right now. Spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. FanDuel.com/locked on. Kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official sports partner of the NFL.